Well, as you can see, we're going to be discussing Dusk Till Dawn. This is going to be my overall review of the set. Now, it's probably going to end up quite lengthy, and I don't know, as per recording this, if I'm going to split it into 3 or if it's just going to be a long video. But before we get started, there's something really important to put out there as a disclaimer. I am going to be highly critical of this set for a few reasons. But if you're not a fan of constructive criticism, of somewhat well-reasoned negativity, you know where the thumbs down is, and you're good to go, okay? Other than that, right, we do have quite a lot to discuss about this set, starting with, well, the article that's on screen, and then the print run, the actual art choices and prints, and the two biggest flaws I personally feel of the set, and they are to do with these taglines. One, I personally feel that the lore of the game has impeded on the design of this set, and 2, that the card variation has suffered from their reprint policy or reprint ideology and the way of promos. I think those two factors have heavily impacted how this set was designed and presented, and has led to some less than favorable choices for the cards. Now, as I said, we're going to be starting with this article because there are some important points that I want to read over and discuss, mainly to do with this tagline that it is the 10th set milestone, that Dusk Till Dawn marks a special milestone, being the 10th booster set released, and because of that, they have crafted something special for the players and collectors alike. Now, this statement does hold true. This set is probably the most well-balanced set in terms of pulling legendaries, squashing the mentality behind buying boxes or sealed product of Flesh and Blood. There is no other set that at the moment feels like Dusk Till Dawn when it comes to just going out and buying loose booster packs, right? It feels completely comfortable and completely okay to go buy a single box rather than case, or to go buy loose packs, because they have really done a good job at balancing pull rates. In terms of collectors, we're going to discuss this a bit more later on, but it is to do with the way they've handled cold foils for the most part, right? So a lot of cold foils feature extended art variation without both copies. So for instance, in some other sets, we usually get a normal version, extended art version, and then a special version to try and sum it up, right? In Dusk Till Dawn, we have the rainbow foil, and then we have the cold foil setting itself apart from the rainbow foil through extended art variation. Now, this is a great thing in terms of collectability, but it is not without its own downside. Back to the article, though. So, Dusk Till Dawn features the most magnificent marvels yet. Returns the first ever hero from Living Legend, and honors the original Light and Shadow Living Legend heroes with a 10-card serialized set of hand-drawn artist sketch cold foil hero cards. Yeah. We all have a little bit of disappointment with this statement, right? Because they're not so much artist sketch as artist proofs. So I think what we were hoping and expecting is a little bit different to what we got. For each prism and, of course, chain, artist sketches are unique, illustrated by hand, and by the original artists of these iconic heroes, right? They're wonderful pieces of art, but they are not as spectacular as what we may have been hoping. Now, altogether, this statement, initial presentation regarding the set, it created a lot of buzz, it created a lot of hype, and with hype comes a higher expectation. And personally, I think there are a lot of things that have fallen short in terms of this set. For starters, we'll zero in on these marvels, right? Dusk Till Dawn features the most magnificent marvels yet. In all honesty, I don't know what I was expecting, but I was expecting something different. These angels are not significant, right? In terms of design. Yes, they are gorgeous. Yes, they are beautiful. Yes, they are magnificent. But there is nothing truly setting them apart from the dragons, right? They are done in the exact same fashion, the exact same style, and in that vein, I would not dub them the most magnificent marvels yet, right? I wouldn't refer to them in any other way than what I would honestly expect as the basis for marvels. When we got the dragons, this was my full expectation for all marvels going forward, right? That we would always and continuously see the use of full borderless art, rather than the marvels we got in, say, Dynasty. Outsiders is a little bit better because they are unique in their own aspect, but I thought this was going to be the stock standard. The Angels, again, while wonderful, while desirable, while collectible, are not anything special. They are equivalent to the marvels of Uprising, although harder to pull because the majority of them, well, all of them, are Majestics. But for me personally, this was a disappointment. I don't know what I expected, but the way they were talked about and discussed and the way they are presented, especially in this article, I was expecting something different. And when you have higher expectations, regardless of how wonderful, how, again, magnificent the product you get, not meeting those expectations or coming close is always going to create a level of disappointment. And the same thing goes for, well, the artist sketch cards, the 10 serialized cards for each hero, so 20 in total. What we got is not necessarily something as significant as what we had hoped. So these are the artist proofs. If you haven't seen them yet, right? A few have been pulled, not all of them have been found, so it's wonderful in terms of boxes, although it is continuing to tank the overall value of cards in the set, right? We're probably seeing the most boxes opened here post-release, almost a month in. We're going to see the majority of Dusk Till Dawn open, again, searching for these cards, although they are not valued as highly as some people thought, and their overall presentation isn't as spectacular as what some people hoped, right? For all intents and purposes, again, like the Angels, they are beautiful cards. They are well done, they are just not extraordinary enough for what was presented with the announcement of Dusk Till Dawn. And if you don't know why, it's simply because these are the style of cards you can find within your own means, right? So this is Art House Syndicate. They have a bunch on offer. They will continue to have a bunch on offer. This is a Vizette proxy, essentially, right? But it's in the same vein as these artist proof cards, because guess what? They are artist proofs. Federico, the person who does Chain's artist proofs, right? He has his own for sale. And, of course, at almost every convention you can find them, and you can purchase them. They are not significant enough to warrant the desirability a lot of people thought they might have. Yes, them being cold foil is fantastic. Yes, again, they are spectacular and beautiful cards. It's just another point at which our expectation and our hopes and dreams for the set hasn't quite been met, and therefore this has led to disappointment. They are artist proofs, right? They are still hand-drawn, they are still beautiful, but I think a lot of us were hoping that Legend Story Studios would do what they do best, and that is pursue something above the standard, right? Legend Story Studios has continued to try and elevate their cards to make them stand out. From the very beginning, the invention of cold foil, right, was ahead of its time. We see a lot of other card games catch up and surpass Flesh and Blood in foiling, but at the time, cold foils were extraordinary. Even though, by today's standards, they are somewhat simplistic, they were extraordinary. So we had high hopes that Legend Story Studios would continue with this vein, and they would present to us something the likes of which we had never seen, right? Instead, when we got these artist proofs, again, something that is somewhat readily available, although not in cold foil, we couldn't help but be a little bit disappointed. So again, this is the whole criticism that I have, where what was hyped up and what was presented around Dusk Till Dawn, especially, again, this article that it is the 10th Milestone set, that is going to be significant, that is going to be something specially crafted, just was never able to fulfill what it set out to highlight. Because, again, the expectations we have were never going to be able to be met, because they were going to be something outside the realm of what was necessarily achievable. Again, the Marvels, the Angels, they're fantastic, but they are just the dragons, right? There is nothing significantly different from the Uprising Marvels to the Angels, okay? They are not the most magnificent Marvels yet. You might have a preference for Angels, you might have a preference for dragons, but they are comparable, and therefore they are not the most magnificent Marvels yet. And then, of course, the same thing could be said for the serialized art cards, right? Expectation could never really live up to the reality. It's just human nature, right? We build things up in our head, especially when there is, a time gap between when something is announced and then when we actually receive it, and in this case, when you actually find the art cards. The other thing that I think is worth opinionating, right, is that I personally feel that the rate of collectors is somewhat overestimated for Flesh and Blood. Yes, we're seeing, monumentous growth in terms of players and growth in the community. Of that, be generous. Say 10% of every player who picks up Flesh and Blood, who falls in love with the game, then moves on to be a collector. Right? They want all the cold foils, they want legendaries, right? Not just to play with, but to have and store. Of that, there's only going to be a handful of people who are actually high-end collectors. And for all intents and purposes, that's what the serialized art cards fall under, right? They're high-end cards. Any card worth probably over $500, definitely over $1,000, is a high-end card, right? Not everyone is just going to drop that amount of money and then sit on the card. So in that regard, right, I never thought that the demand for these serialized art cards was ever going to be significant, to the point where these cards, would be $10,000 plus, would be alpha card level plus, right? For all intents and purposes, I kept saying they'd be, the high end of the Marvel card, like Levia, for instance. And that's kind of what we're seeing, right? Out of the ballpark, I think one was asking $45,000, something close to that. And then as we started to recognize that these are just, variations of artist proof cards, the offers sort of dried up, and we're sitting at the, $5,000 and below mark, which I still think is not necessarily going to amount to much, right? I think there's a standing offer of a couple thousand for them, for someone to pick up and just hold on to. I think that's probably a decent estimate, but at the same time, again, I don't feel that there's enough demand out there for competition to essentially inflate the prices and cause a greater level of demand than what we see. That said, I think had they been different, had they been something a bit more spectacular, maybe something that emphasized collecting multiples of them, or having, more than just, say, the prize numbers, if you will. Because usually in serialized art cards or serialized cards, right, low numbers, especially 1, is significant. Or, if it's a lucky number to an individual, they'll put more stock in its value. I think, personally, what I might have liked to have seen for these cards would be some level of storytelling, right? Frederico has on his selling, this chain image is 6 different cards, right? You can see the lines here, and they make up one big image. Now, that's not what I would like to have seen. What I would have liked to have seen is each card in the 10 for each hero tells a story. For instance, for Prism, I would have loved it depicting her ascension to the throne, right? So we have, similar to the initial Prism, and then as she's, say, walking up to maybe and sitting on the throne. I think having those 10 cards tell a story in unison, where if you do somehow manage to get your hands on a portion of them, right, maybe numbers 5 through 7, for instance, you can see some level of motion, if you will, between the art of the cards, rather than what it basically is, which is just them asking the artist to redraw the character 10 times, right? Something to actually create this value and this desire to have a large portion of them. I think given the community basis in terms of, again, collectors, which in my opinion is a lot smaller than what people think, I think that would have done a lot better. Altogether, obviously something other than the artist proof cards would have drummed up a bit more motivation in trying to get your hands on them, and people sort of, bidding wars, essentially, for the cards. I think a big, again, concern with Dusk Till Dawn is the whole presenting Dusk Till Dawn as this 10th set milestone, and trying to drive up these expectations without actually presenting something at the get-go is an issue. Right, we all bought into it, and from that, we all had our own illusions of grandeur of what would eventually amount from Dusk Till Dawn. For instance, counter this, right? Obviously, we were given the Bologna Marvel card, right? So we did know that these are essentially equivalent to the dragons. Personally, I thought they'd, evolve cold foils, if you will, come up with some sort of new technique, possibly texturing. I think texturing would be fantastic for the cold foils. Again, if done the way Legends Story Studios has been handling foil. Okay, tastefully and not just a blanket, slap it on top so it looks unique. Right, imagine this. The cold foil, right, has textures for the different material. So the feathers, you know, are slightly feathered, right? We could have just simple a triangle-ish pattern that branches out. And then on the armor, we maintain the smooth cold foil. And then on the cloth, right, you could have it a bit cross-hatched, right? I think incorporating those textured elements would be fantastic. Yes, it's a lot of work, but again, we were presented with this tagline of the most magnificent marvels to date. And again, from my perspective, that was chalking up some expectations that were never going to be met. So altogether, those two core aspects to begin with, you know, they are disappointing to me, not because they are bad, right? They are not bad. They are fabulous. They are magnificent, but they're not anything new, right? And I think it's the reality that they're not anything new that creates this sense of disappointment, and therefore the less desirability for them. And then we have the other two big concerns that I feel and I perceived about the set. And that is, again, that the lore sort of stifles the set design, and then also that they don't want to compete with promos in terms of the card variation we did receive. So in terms of lore, right? Obviously, these are presented as the major players on the light side, right? Oldhim, Bolton, Dorinthia, Cheyenne, Lexi, Briar, Bravo, right? That's all great to see. From a lore point, right? It worked fantastically. All the lore is wonderful. All the lore has always been wonderful for Flesh and Blood. But in terms of the set design, this is where, for me, I've gone back and forth over and over again and tried to decide, and I finally decided it was not worth it. Okay? All of these heroes that are presented to us. Okay, Cheyenne, one pitiful card. Lexi, another. Briar, Oldham, Dorinthia, right? The amount of support and cards for them is significantly overshadowed by the necessity they have for the new design of Prism, and to correct the course of Shadow Runeblade in the way of Visette, right? Moving away from Soul Shackles, moving away from necessarily the banish mechanic, more so to generating Runechant tokens. Okay, in order to work around those two new heroes and their design, right? They have, in my opinion, sacrificed the design points of these other heroes so that they can fill up the slots with necessary cards for their new design, right? So the new Prism desperately wants to play off of the Heralds, therefore needs a lot more Herald support. Similarly, Visette now makes a core use of Runechant, right, more than Chain, so we need a new development for that in the way of RuneGate. And because of this, I really want to pose a question. Do you think it was worth the inclusions of the handful of cards we got for all of them? Right, this jumbled up mess of a back end, to me, of Dusk Till Dawn. Again, I had really high hopes and expectations when the spoilers were signed to be released. Right, I did lots of videos covering them and discussing it, and hoping that this was going to set a really good tone, and it has. There are a lot of things that I think lay the groundwork for all future sets, but again, my expectation that grew and grew and grew from everything discussed and everything dripped down for the set before we actually got what we got, caused this level of disappointment, right? I had really hoped that we'd see a core fundamental idea like we have, right? Touching back on Light and Shadow, and then we'd see a third of the set devoted to a significant portion of play, right? Because again, this set is designed to expand classic play, right? It says right here, designed to expand constructed play. Not intended to be used for draft or seal, so that's fine, but designed to expand constructed play. To what degree does this set do that? To the same degree as Crucible or Everfest, right? Crucible has always been a hard thing to reproduce, because again, to me, it was a sweet spot, right? You had Welcome to Wraith, you had Arcane Rising, you had a smaller amount of segmentation and diversity amongst heroes, and you had Crucible as this adjoining product that really roped everyone in. Everfest was decent by way of the extra stuff it added and sort of a reprieve from the general design, right? We got something more fun and flashy in the way of the carnival mechanics, the items, the talismans, but then we have Dusk Till Dawn. And to me, it doesn't really expand constructed play in the way that those other sets do. all it does is serve as the medium to introduce Visette and Prism, to tweak, I guess, Bolton a little bit. And to be honest, I don't fully understand what's going on with Levia, right? The extent of the value of the new cards. So for that, again, I can't say either way, but it doesn't seem like an overall successful medium for driving all of play. Again, the top end cards, right? So the few shining nuggets within the set have done fantastically. Again, I can't stop raving on the high end of the set, right? The Majestics, the Legendaries, and what they're doing in terms of play, in terms of collectability, in terms of pull rates, all that is fantastic. But the bottom end of the set is really a miss to me, right? If we look at the cards, if we look at what is actually provided to us, Prism, for starters. Yes, fantastic that we're working in new ways to utilize Heralds. Granted, there's not that many, right? Because the majority of Prism cards are just reprinted Heralds that again suffer from the other thing I want to discuss, which is they don't want to step on the toes of promos. They don't want to disrupt their ideology of keeping reprints contained to a certain degree, right? So we get extended art Heralds, right? No extended art foils, not anything significant, just hard to pull, hard to collect, extended art that, in all honesty, if you're going for, you would just try to find the promo variants that do exist, right? Because a few of them do have those rainbow foil extended art promos, and that's what I think they don't want to compete with, hence why we didn't get anything significant. Or you'd probably just go with rainbow foil normal ones from Monarch, right? Because the majority of people, I do think, prefer shiny over extended. So in terms of Prism, besides introducing the new variants and the new mechanics for Prism, what degree of expansion to play has this done, again, in comparison to those other supplemental sets, to Dynasty, to Crew, to Everfest, right? For Bolton, we get some adjustments, we get some new core mechanics around this banner system. Again, it's fantastic. There's just not enough there for me, and at the same time, there's too much, right? Again, you can chalk up a lot of the commons in this set as nothing. They are, niche, and they would have benefited from a draft environment, in my opinion. We have the 3 armor sets. Do we really need that? Right? For them to do what they want to do. The frontline armor, again, over the use of Ironhide or Iron Rot is interesting to me. It only really serves a purpose in Blitz, because Classic Constructed will be too slow, and you are heavily penalized for now going first, because you lose a whole round and therefore a whole level of, or points of defense on the arm. Then we get the light cards, right? Again, there's huge dichotomy between Shadow and Light that I think would have served a greater purpose if it was in the generic slot over these cards. And then we have the Shadow set, again, for Visette, introducing Rune Chant as a core mechanic for Shadow Runeblade over Soul Shackle, right? More so than ever. And then the armor set, Levia, that's another ballpark. I've got it right here. We will get to that. And then you have this weird back end, where again, the high-end cards, fantastic, playable, but then these just pointless inclusions, right? The token slots, when we could have got somewhat meaningful niche commons that, again, could have offered these heroes who are participating in the war a significant interaction with the Shadow mechanic, right? Which would have sustained lawfully. But instead, we get, for instance, Moloch Hill, right? This card, in particular, is just 100% lore card. Yes, it has an interesting ability. Yes, it probably could see play in niche uses, but to me, it is fundamentally a card that is just meant to tell a story, right? So you have Moloch Hill. Next time you'd be dealt lethal damage this turn, you may banish Minerva from your hand or arsenal to prevent that damage. Then you've got the little text, no amount of retribution can ally the pain, the anguish, seared into the souls of those that remain. So again, from the story perspective, this is saying that there was a battle at Moloch Hill, right? Dorinthia and Minerva were there. Dorinthia almost suffered lethal damage, but Minerva took the fall. Something like that, right? Wonderful. But it seems out of place to me. I think Dusk Till Dawn could have served better if it was split up, right? Imagine we got one portion of it, this initial version of Dusk Till Dawn being Dawn, so to speak, right? So focused solely on the light and the heroes helping out. More cards for, obviously, Dorinthia, Oldhim, Briar, Lexi, right? More support. No filler. Really lean in on the story rather than, again, sacrificing cards that could have been crucial to expanding play to slot in these handful of cards. Or the other way, right, which is what I was hoping for, where, again, fundamental idea, so light and shadow, but then a third of the set dedicated to all of play, right? To specializations for every single hero. I did the math, I did the numbers, I presented it multiple times. You got rid of the tokens, the equipment, right? You could have easily provided 1 or 2 cards. You could have still kept equipment for a lot of them, but you could have provided 1 or 2 cards for every single hero in the game. Some specialization, some unique mechanic may be used purposefully as a lore check-in, right? So you still have the heroes participating, and then you have the heroes elsewhere. And again, it would have expanded all of play to the same degree as those other supplemental sets. This is a supplemental set, yet it is highly niche. And I don't mind having a core theme. But again, this is meant to serve the purpose of expanding play, right? Yet it is mainly a medium for presenting and telling the story of Dusk Till Dawn. Something that I personally feel should be second to the actual gameplay and the design of the set, right? We have articles, we have those methods of storytelling. The cards themselves should, yes, depict things related to the story that's ongoing, but shouldn't make concessions or sacrifice expanding all the play when it is, again, a supplemental set. I think altogether, again, the presentation of Dusk Till Dawn, right? It's a supplemental set, but it's not going to be in line with the other supplemental sets. We're going to have all these cards, but at the same time, they're just going to be similar to what we already have. Expectation versus reality, I think, is the big disconnect for me when it comes to Dusk Till Dawn. And then in terms of promos, the other points that I want to make, right? So again, the Heralds, we only get the extended art variants. For the heroes, we don't get anything spectacular, right? We had foil versions in Crucible. We had the Marvel Bravo in Everfest. We had the Emperor. We had Soroya. We had the Mechanologist in Dynasty. Yet, in this, all these background cards, all the cards that you'd want some chase variant to, don't, right? And it is my opinion that they are being sacrificed to keep them in line with the promo variants, right? Weapons. There are no Rainbow Foil variants of the majority of weapons. There are Cold Foil variants, but then there's nothing. We've got, do I have it open? No, I have print run. Yeah, we'll open it quickly. We have Prism. Short printed, regular. No other variation, because the promo exists. That is, again, my honest opinion, why I don't think we see anything else. Same with Luminaris, just a regular version, nothing else, right? No foil version, no cold foil version either for her staple weapon, because, again, I will highlight that it's probably because it's a promo. Then we have the Heralds, all regular, all extended art. It feels weird to me. Again, they seem hard to pull, they seem harder than rares, yet at the same time all they are is extended art, in which case you might as well go pursue the promos that do exist for the few Heralds that have extended art Rainbow Foil variants. All the weapons, Bolton, Levia, all the heroes, right? There's just regular versions of them that have no purpose existing, because by and large they are just filler. They're reprinted for no purpose. It is a supplemental set. I don't need another copy of Bolton to draft, right? When I can get a copy from Monarch, I can get a token, when I can get all these other things that surpass the quality of these filler cards in Dusk Till Dawn. And again, I am heavily speculating that it's because they don't want to impede on the prints that are for promos, the Cold Foil variants, the Rainbow Foil variants, right? They want to make sure that when they do reprint a card in any fashion, it is limited, so it doesn't cannibalize those other interests. In the case of the Heralds, right, what I would argue, they could have done, different art, right? It didn't have to be extended art. They could have actually placed the Heralds at the Battle of Sol, right? They could have made them match the set rather than being these lackluster reprints, in my opinion, that occupy so much of Prism's card design and card space in Dusk Till Dawn. It's just confusing to me, right? it feels like they went all in on the high end and didn't really have time to shore up the other half of Dusk Till Dawn, which is another disappointment, right? Even having those thoughts or views, whether they're correct or not, but having that sit at the back of your mind, when again, this is presented as this 10th milestone set, as this celebration of Flesh and Blood, as a big crowning achievement, to then not really live up to expectation, especially with the things presented to us, it's going to be disappointing. There's no other way to put it, but Dusk Till Dawn, to an extent, to me, is a disappointment. And that's, again, not even getting into the actual cards, because there are a few grievances I have with the cards themselves, and then also some really exciting things that I do want to talk about, things that, again, lay the foundation for what we see in the future, but at the same time are still a little bit questionable as to why this occurred, why this way and why not that way. Okay, but before we jump into the card discussion and the cards I've pulled out here to highlight a few other things, print runs, right? So right here, before I make this bottom half expanded, let's discuss print runs, because there are some important things to look at and a big question to ask, right? Do you think that Flesh and Blood is still overprinted, right? I think, well, you know what? I'm not going to say what I think just yet, right? Let me present a few points and some arguments, and then I'll tell you where I land on that, right? So we have the print run update from the 14th of April. It outlines, obviously, only till Everfest. We don't have Uprising Dynasty, Outsiders. The history packs are a little bit different, so we'll leave them out of the equation. And of course, we have Dynasty now. The estimate for a lot of people is somewhere between 200,000 to 300,000. Personally, again, from my rough estimates and calculations using pull rates and reverse engineering the 20 serialized art cards, I am at a total printing of 288,000 boxes. And why is this number important? Well, Everfest, right? There are 229,000 in circulation. Right? So Everfest is not being released as unlimited, but it was printed. Okay, and this is really important because they have another article, right? Fab 2.0 outlines that their mentality was that unlimited always had to be greater than first edition, and it was only just reaching the point where they were equivalent, right? And this article was, or I should say, the changes for Fab 2.0 were introduced here, right? So at the very least, the article or the thoughts were conceived somewhere here, right? Hence why they pulled Everfest Unlimited. But what that means is Monarch and Tales didn't necessarily suffer from that to the same degree, right? They printed in line with the other sets where the Unlimited was significantly higher than that of the first edition. And that is somewhat scary when you consider Monarch, right? If we lowball them all, right, and we say they're equivalent, right? So for the unlimited printing of Monarch, it's equivalent. There's 125,000. So the total print run of Monarch is 250. Again, I don't think that's realistic. I would highly expect that the Monarch Unlimited is a significant multiplier of Monarch, maybe 4 times, something around there, which is crazy to think about. Even if it's only 2 times, it's still significant, right? And then you have Tales. I would highly doubt that these numbers can be anything less than these, because that just doesn't make sense from their existing mentality, that they would organize the printing of first edition to be more than unlimited. But at the very least, if we say there are 400,000 boxes of Tales of Aria floating around, and right now, Dusk Till Dawn is sitting at 288,000, right? It means that the print numbers are not yet equivalent to this block, right? To the overprinted block of Flesh and Blood, what a lot of us consider the significantly overprinted block. So what does that mean for Uprising Dynasty and, of course, Outsiders? Uprising and Outsiders being non-supplemental sets, we would probably assume that the print run is higher, right, than that of Welcome to Wraith and Arcane Rising. You can sort of see it in the first few sets, right? Welcome to Wraith is significantly greater than Crew in total, and then Arc is minorly, right? You wouldn't call that difference majorly. Well, it's tens of thousands, so it is, okay? So again, the supplemental set is less. So Outsiders, 300,000 plus, easy. Uprising, same. Maybe a bit less because they pulled it back. But Dynasty, you know, probably around the 200,000 mark. Something similar to those numbers, I think, is a fair estimate. So again, the question, is Flesh and Blood overprinted? The next point that I would argue when it comes to thinking about that question, right, is going back to, again, card pool segmentation and the niches that each product fulfills. Flesh and Blood is not like any other game. Okay, there is no standard rotation. There is no innate desire for new sets to come out because the old sets have rotated out. Similarly, not every player, not every collector will necessarily want every single card of every single hero. You will have people who favor X hero and only want cards of X hero. Okay, so it doesn't matter if the print run has grown to 400,000. If you are, or even the player base has grown to, say that, 400,000, right? If they only want X amount of cards, then the product does not have 100% saturation. Okay? No product for Flesh and Blood will ever have 100% saturation or even close to the extent of other card games. This is something that you realistically have to understand because that is just not how the game is designed. You cannot have Monarch be valued by every single player of Flesh and Blood equivalently, right? That's just really unrealistic to say. In all honesty, okay, you can think I'm wrong. That's fine. That's fair. These are my thoughts and opinions, but you have to understand that there is some level of logic to that. If you only play Warrior, you only want the sets that feature Warrior, and at worst, you only want the cards that are for Warrior, so you don't actually want the entirety of that set. So, in terms of overprinted, I think it is still quite overprinted. Again, we use the numbers from Dusk Till Dawn, okay? Go off of what I said. No, go off of 250,000. Okay, so 6 million booster packs, right? Roughly 100,000 legendaries. Roughly 10,000, 12,500-ish of each individual legendary. Do you think that there are 12,000 players out there who want a copy of that legendary? Take the Brute, right? For example. It is playable, it is desirable, but do you think that there are 12,000 Brute players out there who all want this legendary helmet, right? If the entirety of Dusk Till Dawn was consumed, right? Which again is somewhat doubtful, but that's sort of what we're seeing in terms of the numbers crashing, because a lot of people are still hunting for, you know, the high-end cards, the Levias, the Angels even, and of course the serialized art cards. So, do you think that there are enough players for the amount of cards of each circulation being as segmented as it is, right? You could say that the player base spans 1 million people, which I think is a little high. Is actually kind of a lot high, really, as an active competitive player. Yeah, right? There are way too many cards still for the players who actually want them, again, because of segmentation. Because not every card will appeal to every player. So, in that light, in that understanding, to have Dynasty almost reach back to the Monarch level, right? If we say this is, you know, upwards of 250, most likely upwards of 300,000, I would say close to 400,000, it's still overprinted. Even if we return to where these numbers are acceptable, it would still be overprinted, because we also have the horizontal growth in the game, the introduction of new heroes, right? Of new subtypes, where, again, we are continuing to segment the player populace, and we are continuing to decline in the, again, overall necessity of each set, with Dusk Till Dawn being highly devoted to light and shadow. It has even less desirability than the other supplemental sets. Its print run, to me, should be less than Dynasty. The print run of all future sets need to factor in the desirability of their cards and the proportion of the player base that they actively target. So to that extent, I do think that Flesh and Blood is overprinted. I think that they should, in all honesty, devote time to smaller sets, to sets that, again, corner the entirety of their player market. We are past the point where collectability fuels Flesh and Blood. It is a beloved and highly playable and highly enjoyable game. So there needs to be some level of understanding of that in the products presented by Legend Story Studios. So to me, 288,000 boxes, if that is correct, is too many for Dusk Till Dawn. For the level of interest, and again, the overall necessity of each legendary. Especially for a set that is highly incentivized to open to find those chase cards, where a lot of the other cards that aren't valued so heavily are hitting the market. In case in point, the legendaries. Okay, that's pretty much all I want to say for the prints. Let's look at the cards. Let's discuss the cards. Right, so obviously I've pulled out some points of interest, if you will. The Angels, we've already gone over, right? They are, to me, not significantly better or more magnificent than the Dragon Marvels, okay? Levia, let's start with Levia, all right? The Legendary, it is plain. I initially thought when I pulled it, again, I didn't look too closely at the printing types of different cards, right, that I pulled an error, right? I was very confused, very baffled. They give me a Legendary outside of the crown that is just plain. And looking online, right, the argument or the defense is Rainbow Foil is difficult to do for two-face cards. Zoroya wants to check in, right? So Rainbow Foil Zoroya. There's also the Rainbow Foil Mechanologist. What is the reason? Right? This feels disappointing to me. Right? It feels like I was sort of given the short end of a stick. Right? To pull this and then just for it to be classic, so to speak, when we compare it to all the other legendaries. Right? It's obviously still a high card, right? I think it's $80 for the normal variation. But is it acceptable? Right? That's what I kind of want to ask. That we get this, right? We get it as is, rather than to the extent of every other legendaries. Again, I don't want to harp on too strongly, and I don't want to say all around that it's a negative thing or an overtly negative thing. But it is a question to ask. Just why? Why does this exist as plain? Right? Time? Was that the issue? Was there difficulties? It raises more questions and concerns than what I would like. And I don't think that's a good thing to see. We come to expect a level of polish and finish when we think of Flesh and Blood, when we think of Legend Story Studios, because they have, in most circumstances, gone above and beyond. So, Dusk Till Dawn as it is, right? Again, I will keep hammering home, just so you know that I'm not completely negative. I have opened a lot, I will continue to open, but aside from the top end, there is something missing with the bottom end of the set. The other Marvels, okay? The other hero Marvels. What happened? Were they too good, right? Because again, they're being reserved for promos. And it's so confusing to me because, yes, having people show up to events to find promos, they are fantastic. It's lovely that promos are worth something. But should promos come before what's in a set, right? What you're actually paying for directly, right? To have these versions of the heroes, right? To have the new Prism, to have Bolton and Levia, significantly, again, right? This could have served a better purpose for their inclusion. To have them as their Marvel variants would have been nice. So altogether, I just can't stop thinking that a lot of things fall short of expectation when it comes to Dusk Till Dawn. Similarly, the Radiant set. By far, it's got to be some of the most gorgeous artwork they've presented yet. Right? I really have fallen in love with them. I know lots of people that absolutely love the design of this set of armor. The issue, right? The cold foil just doesn't work. Okay? The cold foiling is way too dark because, again, it is a metallic sort of foiling. So there should have been the option of rainbow foil. And again, I will ask, why isn't there rainbow foil variants of the majority of equipment? Right? It's something we usually come to expect. And it's just a little confusing to me. Our options are plain and overprinted, or dark, murky, cold foil that doesn't do the art justice. Right? Again, it could be that there are going to be promo variants and they don't want to impede on the printing. Extended art. That is the other big thing to look at. All right, we'll chuck away the crown. So, in a lot of circumstances, scaling flesh bag aside, right? For whatever reason, the majestic brute helm got it instead. The dichotomy is you get a rainbow foil normal version and a cold foil extended art version, which conceptually, if you think about it, is a really, really good design aspect, right? Again, it separates the two more so than what they are and gives more weight and value to the cold foil. I'm sure a lot of us were expecting to have the 3 variants, right? To have rainbow foil, cold foil, and then a hard to pull extend art. And obviously what we're actually seeing and actually got is just the 2. And I think this is definitely going to lay the blueprint for future sets, right? To, again, separate the cold foil for the high-end cards, in this case legendary, from the rainbow foil, more so than obviously the foiling type and the pull type, or pull rarity. So that is a wonderful thing to see. I just, again, can't help but ask why the spoiled skull over the scaling flesh bag? Why not have uniformity amongst the legendaries, right? Have all of them, again, be the extended art. Sorry, I haven't been fortunate enough yet to pull a Diadic Caprice, right? Why not have that across the board? All legendaries, if you pull them in cold foil, are the extended art variants to, again, create that level of separation. I need to look at it properly, but I believe it is the Spoiled Skull, the Diaritic, sorry, yeah, I know what that sounds like, Caprice, the Empyrean's Rapture, and what other ones? Levia, obviously, but that's more a hero extended, not actually a true extended art. But altogether, right, conceptually, doesn't that work and feel a little bit better if all the legendaries, cold foils, are always extended art? To again create that growing divide and actually raise them up on a pedestal to make cold foil special, because that's something I always kept thinking about. How do they return cold foils to their own glory? And across the board, if all cold foils were extended art variants, right? You cut out the middleman, no normal cold foil, but all extended art variants, right? I think that would probably give enough weight to them for people to desire them, for people to start then collecting some of the less desirable cold foils too, the common and rare equipment. But yeah, I don't know, it was just odd to me that you get the Diadem, you get the Rapture, you get the Caprice, and then a few just no, and then just the Spoiled Skull. I should really look up all the ones that are extended art. I don't know, the list on Fabtcg, and then also the Fabry cards, not everything's there just yet, I don't think. But yeah, so I think there's 4 then, right? The Caprice, again, don't have the other version. The Rapture, don't have the other version. And then the Spoiled Skull and the Diadem, right? Kind of an odd choice. Kind of would have made more sense to me again if all the legendaries, or if all cold foils were extended art. And I do think that this will lay the foundation, especially if, again, these are perceived as more valuable than just a cold foil variant of the normal version, despite not necessarily being harder to pull. And then the Crown. So the Crown is obviously an excellent reprint, right? And holds true to, again, their ideology, where if it's necessary, they can reprint it, and they have ways to reprint it as a lesser version. And what else is there to really say? It's done its job, right? It's highly affordable. It's more so than, obviously, the crew variant of the Tunic, or the History Pack version, right? So, Crown, tick. Extended art, tick mostly. It's just kind of questionable, their choices. And more so, communication. Communication would be lovely, right? To understand these choices. I know people sometimes hate explaining themselves. I hate explaining myself. But it would still be nice to understand choices when they are sort of made half-heartedly, if you will. Right, if you're going to go with this mentality, do it across the board. Why the Spoiled Skull over, again, the scaling flesh bag, right? Is well, it's not, obviously, just the core equipment for the new heroes, because we get 2 Illusionist, and we don't get any Light Warrior extended art. One of them might have been extended art. What would it be? It would be the Soulbound Resolve, or I guess the Ironsong Venus, but I know the Ironsong Venus is an extended art, because I have both versions. But yeah, I don't know, just curious. More information would always be welcome, always be nice. And then, of course, the big thing to sort of talk about, commons, right? We've gone over this a few times. Everyone is sick of them. They don't serve a purpose in a supplemental set. You can fill out your collection, you can still get them cheaply, all within a few boxes. So anyone who is opening en masse, looking for X card, is going to be really sick of them. In a supplemental set, they should just be cut away. We shouldn't have got the tokens just being excluded altogether, the set being smaller altogether, I think would have come across nicer. Because the big issue is these choices, they raise questions. And when you have questions without answers, you start to go down the negative route more so than the positive route, right? Because again, this is a fabulous change. The question of if they carry it forward and they do it across the board for all legendaries, right? That's a fantastic question. That is a fantastic outlook in terms of collectability. But, right, you lean more on the side of that question. Why? Why these cards? Why not these cards? Why not all the legendaries? Why this? Why that? Did you not have time? Did you run out of time for the sets? Right? I mean, everyone would have been happy for a delay for, improved quality or overall improved feel, if you will, of the set. So yeah, questionability is always a thing that sits at the back of your head. But yeah, commons, token slots, heralds, reprints of the heroes, right? So much filler in the bottom of Dusk Till Dawn, right? I have a box full of cards, right? Lots of people have boxes full of cards. Sorry for the banging. I'm trying to get to said box so I can actually make my points. All right, this is just a little bit of what I have of Dusk Till Dawn. This is all Dusk Till Dawn, right? It's no other set. It's all getting filled as I open more and more, and at some point I will just have to dispose of it, which is, more than annoying, right? It's clutter, it's trash, it's not needed, and I think the overall feel of the set would have been better if they cut down on the pack size, right? Rather than 10 card packs. Okay, if we had a smaller pack size, right? We had, half the commons, half the rares. The rare then sometimes being replaced by the chase cards, so rares were even harder to play. If it took you longer than what it does to find a full set of playable cards, right? Token, trash. Well, actually, obviously, it's a new token, so it's not necessarily trash. But say they cut out half the commons, right? So instead of 7, right, we got 4. Take you longer to fill out your collection. Take you longer to find a place. Feel better. Same with the rares, right? Get rid of 1. Have a, 6 card pack. Right? Every now and then your rare is replaced by Majestic or better. Takes you a lot longer to find your full set of rares. It takes you a lot longer to find your full set of commons. And altogether, right, there's more chance, if you will, for rares, for commons to hold value. I think, generally, you could find a full playset of commons in 1 to 2 boxes, and you could almost find a full playset of rares in a case. And then you're just left with boxes and boxes of throwaway cards as you hunt for the gems of the set. Again, the top end, fantastic. And I will obviously wrap up with the positives. I really need to get into the habit. I know it's what most people want, right? You talk about the positive things first, and then the negative. It's a bit more palatable. But what can I say? These points have more discussion. I want to make sure I get everything across before we just wrap up on the good stuff, because there is some good stuff, right? I don't want to be all negative. Again, I love Flesh and Blood. I'm a big collector of Flesh and Blood. I open every single set. I open lots of every single set, aside from the initial block, but I have opened the block. I do have collections of all the cards spanning all the sets, and I have been around for all the sets. Okay? So, I'm not here just to harp on the game, but there are some questionable choices, and there are some disappointing choices, again, from a lack of reality that meets expectation. So yeah, we all get to the positive stuff. This is what I want, though. Smaller pack sizes, cheaper packs, if be. Again, I've brought this up before. I think Flesh and Blood is wonderful in terms of pricing as boxes. I know we have some grievances with the high-end cards. Dusk Till Dawn has made a monumentous stride towards actual playable cards being relatively cheap. When I say relatively, still having value, but not not being hundreds of dollars, not going to set you back a lot to build a competitive deck that utilizes legendary gear. Right, in that aspect, Dusk Till Dawn has done well. But in the commons and rares, we continue to be plagued by a overabundance. An overabundance that makes them all too accessible. Right, I don't think we'd have an issue if there was one or two, $1, $2, maybe $5 rares, right? And then some dollar commons. I think a lot of us would be happy with that because, again, it makes you want to then sift through this. I know full well that none of these cards are going to be worth anything, right? So once I get my playset, they will just go in the bin. Well, in a box, but eventually bin, because it is also getting to the point where you can't give them away, right? No one wants them because everyone has too many of them. So yeah, I think reducing, right, if we're moving away from the standard supplemental sets, reducing the pack size is going to be a plus. If you pass the savings on, right, I'm sure everyone will be monumentally happy. Same time, it's not an issue if you don't pass it on, right? I'd honestly just take the convenience of not having to fill up box after box or ordering, cardboard storage boxes for Flesh and Blood. But yeah, on to the good stuff, shall we? Right, so what has Dusk Till Dawn done well? A few things, in all honesty, right? Pull rates above all else is very significant. Right, the overall feel, and again, squashing that concern of having to buy X when it comes to Flesh and Blood, right? So on the older sets, the mentality to try and go for a case. On the new sets, the mentality to always grab a box, versus now Dusk Till Dawn, where it feels completely okay to actually go out and, buy loose packs from the store. Buy a few packs here and there just to open on a whim. You still feel like you have a decent chance to pull, something substantial. All my openings so far, well, the majority of them have been randomized, right? So I've opened all my boxes, I've mixed up the packs, and we've been opening them alongside some other TCGs, and almost every single one of them, I have found something worth finding, right? I think in almost every single one, I've found a legendary, which feels good, and again, speaks to, that randomness, because I've opened anywhere from, less than a box to a few boxes, and altogether, Dusk Till Dawn feels like they finally hit the head of the nail in terms of that mentality and that feel when it comes to buying and opening small quantities of Flesh and Blood, and that is fantastic and is definitely something we want to see maintained going forward. Speaking of which, right, we then have the alternative arts. I think by and large, this set features the most alternative arts. Again, I don't think they're all showcased here, but obviously, as we saw on some of the legendaries, on some of the majestic equipment, and then some of just the Majestics themselves have extended art variants. They've cut out the middleman so that they don't sort of cannibalize one another, right? So you can't get a cold foil and a cold foil extended art. It's just rainbow foil, cold foil extended art. And I think both including this higher variety or higher chase, as well as getting rid of that middle section is wonderful. I don't know too much about the Ruin cards, for instance. They're the ones that stick out in terms of extended art. They are just Shadow, correct? Yes, they're here. Right, so there's normal, there's rainbow, and then there's extended art. That's fine. Right, for the equipment, not having the intermediary is good too. And altogether, yeah, feels good on the high end, right? But we do have to circle back to the low end. Having just these standard versions, especially of Visette and the new Prism, or having them short printed, having them hard to find, is a bit awkward to me. And I can only chalk it up to not wanting to impede on the promo variants that they gave out at events, or the promo variants that they will give out in the foreseeable future. But yeah, so pull rates, fabulous. Art is always a hit when it comes to Flesh and Blood. Again, it gets drowned out by the volume of cards you open, but the fact that even, the common cards, the rare cards, all the art is always fantastic. It's consistently high. It's wonderful. Again, I can nitpick about the two figments that I personally dislike, but they're still high quality art, and it speaks volume to, again, the professionalism of Legendary Studios and their passion towards their game. Right? They're not just trying to churn things out, but at the same time, they must have a time crunch, because a lot of us do feel like there are some time hiccups when it comes to Dusk Till Dawn. And then, of course, we have the playability aspect, right? So, obviously, the Archangels are going to be significantly more playable than the Dragons of Dromai. and that is because they're built more into the actual concept of Prism, whereas we got the increased support through the special ashes of Dynasty to help boost them. But for Prism, obviously, her whole gimmick is Awakening Figments, right? So I do think they will see more play, and they will be staples within her deck. Maybe not all of them completely, but they are more playable. Across the board, I would say that the Majestics of Dusk Till Dawn are the most playable that we've ever seen, which is obviously fantastic to see, right? Nothing is too much of a miss. Again, circle back to the common cards, where a lot of them have the direct dichotomy between Shadow. If we scroll down to right, for instance, Break of Dawn. Right, the next time a Shadow source would deal damage, this turn prevent 3. Would be quite substantial if it was a generic card, right? Because then you could deck tech it in for those specific matchups, because it is a highly efficient card. It's got that niche requirement though, and the fact that, again, it can only be slotted into 2 decks, essentially, right? Prism and Bolton is the letdown. It's not a bad card, but it could have served a far better purpose if they relegated this style of design to the generic slot, right? Would have been more inclusive of these extra heroes that they've tacked on, and I think would have been useful. This is just, right, this whole segment. Elemental. Not needed. Earth. Cool, we get 1 Briar card because she shows up. We get 1 Oldhim card because he shows up. We get 1 Lexi card because she shows up. I just can't help but circle back to it, because it does just stick in my mind that, you know, these should have been cut, in all honesty. Especially obviously, Oldhim is Living Legend, Vizari is Living Legend. You know, what is the true necessity of tacking these cards on, rather than using this design space, this card slot, to have something else that kind of supports the current play, right? For lack of a better terminology. And then we get the Brute, so some support to rolling, right, to dice decks. Again, is warranted, it's just tacked on for the sake of being tacked on. I don't know. There's a lot of things that, you know, appear in every set that seem like future planning. In Dusk Till Dawn, by and large, the majority of it, in all honesty, kind of feels like future planning. Is that a bad thing? No, but it does continue to raise questions and concerns, like, why is this now? Why is the next set going to be PvE, right? Is the next set going to be this? Is the next set going to build upon this? Generally speaking, no, right? They continue to develop whatever they feel like developing at the time, right? Again, speaks to the volume of passion behind Flesh and Blood, and the amount of freedom for their development team, which is fantastic. It's what you want to see. You don't want to see the inner workings of bigger business sort of, you know, condemn and marginalize passion. So that is fantastic to see, but you can't help but tie it to those questions. Dig Up Dinner, super playable. Numbskull seems super playable, right? All the Majestics, again, seem super playable. We just get bogged down with some cards that don't necessarily need to exist or be included in this, especially if it's not draftable, right? Especially if there's just the regular variants and it is just a pack filler. Again, cut the commons, cut the rares, make supplemental sets smaller, pass on the savings, doesn't matter to me. It won't matter to the majority of people, right? Boxes are not, you know, priced to the point where we have concerns. Okay, everyone is happy with the pricing behind Flesh and Blood for the most part when it comes to sealed products. Runeblade, again, right? This is kind of acceptable, right? Because it's meant to make up for the Blood Sheath Skelter. So it's essentially had its ability split between the two. Take it or leave it. Again, Vizari being Living Legend, is it necessary? Probably not, right? Altogether, we could have seen some better stuff implemented here in the back half of the set list, right? More, again, generic cards that play off the dichotomy of Shadow and Light, especially if we're engaging in this battle, right? Have everyone included, have everyone be able to interact a bit better. I mean, it would sort of make sense, right? That Prism or Bolton, you know, assist or aid or do something that enables Dorinthia, Oldhim, Lexi, all of them to sort of negate shadow damage or shadow play a bit better. Then we have the Shapeshifter card. Again, it's a fantastic card. It does breathe some level of viability into Shiner. Not enough yet, right? Again, yet. A lot of cards are yet, but it is good to see. It's a beautiful card. right? I love having the Rainbow Foil card. It's probably going to be one of my most cherished Rainbow Foil cards because of how beautiful it is. But at the same time, you know, there should have been more. There should have been more in this back half, and there should have been less in the top half. Overall, right, it is a good set. Again, it sets the tone and the blueprint for a lot of sets going forward. I hope they stick to the pull rates. I hope they stick to the ability for people to go and buy loose packs and feel okay. And I hope they stick to this mentality that we see where they're separating cold foils from rainbow foils via extended arts. I'm going to have to scroll up a while. We'll go to Illusionist since it's easy, right? So the Imperium's Rapture has not only that level of being a cold foil, but because it's extended art, it's going to be significantly more desirable rather than just slightly more desirable than the rainbow foil. So I do hope they carry that across. I hope it becomes a core concept that almost all cold foils will have that other level to them, right? Or we see, again, some evolution in cold foiling, something to make it a bit prettier, make it a bit more special, right? Because it was, again, revolutionary when it first came out, but now it doesn't really stand up to the test of time, especially when you get certain colorings within cards. So I think texturing, right? Texturing, if you do it as tastefully as they've done rainbow foiling, in terms of, again, certain textures for certain elements, armor, metallic texture, feathers, leather, cloth, a different, and that would work really well, in my opinion. But overall, again, I hope that they continue to carry on this mentality of extended arts to all the cold foils as a way to separate them from their rainbow foil variants. Again, I'm disappointed that we don't see variants of a lot of the stock standard cards, a lot of the common cards, that should have something, or just not be included in general, right? Bolton, useless unless we had that special variation. Altogether, I will continue to open Dusk Till Dawn, but it is just a little bit disappointing when you go back, when you look at the initial, talk about Dusk Till Dawn, this paragraph, right, of hyping it up, but it's just suffering from that whole expectation can't meet reality mentality, right? So we had time to build it up. We had time to ponder on these remarks and create something larger than what could ever be delivered. And because of that, you can't help but feel a little bit disappointed. That is not, again, to say that Dusk Till Dawn is a bad set. It's not a bad set. It's just a different set, if you will. When something is different, you can find some fantastic elements and you can find some less than fantastic elements. And the only other concern is, was it under a time crunch, right? Is there some reason that, corners were cut or it didn't quite feel the way it should feel? Or does it just feel the way it does feel? Because again, it isn't a stock stand supplemental set. If we use, Dynasty, Everfest, and Crew as the blueprint, then Dusk Till Dawn is completely different. And again, because it's different, you don't quite know how to interpret it when you compare it to those other things, right? Calling it a supplemental set is a bit of the concern. I almost would have just gone with expansion set, right? It's meant to, again, add the new Prism, add the new Runeblade Visette as a expansion set, right? Not a supplemental set that is, again, when I think supplemental to all of play, because it's not, right? It's not supplemental to all of play, and it's not going to pique the interests of every single player. It has marginalized people and their participation in sets more so than any other set to date, because again, you cut the draftable aspect, and that is a huge loss when it comes to something that has a high level of segmentation in it, okay? Again, that is my biggest argument for Flesh and Blood, is it has a level of segmentation unlike any other TCG. And that will weigh heavy on sets and affect the way that sets are cannibalized or consumed by consumers. Right? Not every set can speak to every player, and therefore not every new player is a direct player or a direct consumer for Legendary Studios. Growth in the secondary market, growth in the player community is not necessarily growth for Legendary Studios. And to have these style of products, right, that still feel the normal release of normal products, and then to tie in some of the things that were a bit less than fantastic or less than what was expected is always going to be an issue. So the big questions, right? How do you feel, obviously? Again, going through the numbers, do you think that again, 10,000, 20,000 of each legendary is too many? I do, right? I don't think there's enough brute players. I don't think there's enough prism players to warrant that amount of Rainbow Falls training, and especially, again, in a set that is going to be highly opened because of the big chase elements. And then speaking of the chase elements, you know, how did you feel about the sketch cards? Were you disappointed, right? Did you fully expect them not to be what people expected? Again, I do think it does speak to that aspect of the game, right? The collectability is not anywhere close to the initial collectability of Flesh and Blood, right? And that's to be expected. All the growth has majorly been in the play community. Again, for every 10,000 players, you might get, you know, say 1,000 collectors, like diehard collectors that are going out buying every legendary. And then of that 1,000, you might only get a handful of high-end collectors who go out and chase and buy all the highest end cards, right? Cards $500 plus, $1,000 plus, of which the CLSI card's going to fall. So yeah, that'll do. Right, I don't think I've got anything else to talk about. Again, I'm not here for the sake of being negative. I'm here for the sake of progression, and to realistically progress, you need to have constructive criticism, right? If you don't like it, I'm sorry. Honest thoughts, honest opinions. Again, I will still open Flesh and Blood. I will still enjoy Flesh and Blood, but that doesn't mean I can't A, advocate for change, or B, see things in maybe a different light to you, right? Have a different opinion to you, or, you know, just talk about things that are of concern, right? Whether or not I am overestimating them or underestimating them, doesn't really matter. At any level, if they're a concern, they need to be talked about, they need to be discussed, especially when we have a backing like Legend Story Studios, where we do see them take on board a lot of what is discussed or what is vocalized by the community and adjust and change and adapt, right? So there's no harm in talking about it, there's no harm in discussing it, right or wrong, right? It should still be voiced, and we should still put weight in it, again, regardless of how detrimental, right, or how extreme the concern may be. Any concern, small or large, I think is really important to vocalize, and at the very least, we can, you know, hash it out and come to some middle ground, or, you know, outright go through the arguments and find out that I'm completely wrong. That's completely fine, right? The community is wonderful in that regard. We can really have honest discussions, and it's wonderful to see. But yeah, Dusk Till Dawn, right? I should probably do it in this way, right? As a 10th set milestone, as this anniversary-ish product with what was somewhat expected, it's not a good set, right? It's not. It falls short. As just a set, wonderful. The top end is fantastic. The bottom end, you know, it suffers from a lot of what we will still see in the majority of Flesh and Blood sets, right? Commons and rares are too accessible to an extent, and at that point, all that can really happen is they become bulk, right? Trash, especially, again, when you throw in segmentation. So in the purview of this article, of this paragraph, it has not hit the mark. As just a set, it's fine. Better than fine. It just shouldn't be considered a supplemental set, in my opinion. Hope you enjoyed.